Welcome back to Dateline Bangkok. This is part 2 of the podcast with Michael Sheridan, who's a long-time foreign correspondent, formerly of the Sunday Times, who has authored 2 books on Hong Kong and China. Michael, welcome back. Let's get started. So, Michael, you have a new book that you've authored and has been released, The Red Emperor, Xi Jinping and His New China. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and maybe some key takeaways that you want to tell us about?
Well, The Red Emperor is the first, and I say only, simple, clear, direct biography of Xi Jinping, the man. It's a accessible, easy read, not too stuffed with facts and figures. It's a story. And we journalists are storytellers. This man's life is a great story. It's all out there, but few people have told it before at all. The works on Xi Jinping, by and large, are academic or theoretical or politically weighted and so on. And I worked with a terrific Chinese researcher, Howard Zhang, the former head of the BBC's Chinese service, who's a great guy and knows the documents backwards. We were able to collaborate incredibly quickly because research methods are now much faster than they were 5 years ago. And we put together a simple chronological story of a man's life. He's born in 1953. His parents are eminent revolutionaries. They live in privilege. He goes to a beautiful little school in the gardens of the old imperial palaces. He lives a lovely life. One of 4 children, servants, nice food, a car, all the privileges which Mao's leaders arrogated to themselves. And then at the age of 9, his world is turned upside down. His father is purged in one of those Maoist conspiratorial upheavals. He vanishes. He's sent into internal exile, he's detained, he's put through thought control. The little Xi Jinping ends up with his mother and his siblings in a ratty courtyard house in the hutongs of Beijing. He has to survive at school. He's soon bullied and ostracized because word spreads among the other kids at school that his dad is a bad guy. Then China starts the upheaval of the Cultural Revolution and things get even worse. And between the ages of 9 and 13, he witnesses mass violence. The Red Guards take over the school. At intervals, his family, his mother are imprisoned. They're detained in the party school. They're mistreated. They're yelled at. At one point, he himself is paraded on a stage in shame with others in front of a crowd baying for blood and shouting down with Xi Jinping. Oh. And in their ranks, in the front of that crowd, shouting for his head is his own mother. And he's a young teenager at this time. It's an incredibly shattering experience. He was threatened with death several times. This is not, by the way, gossip or innuendo. This is his own account. He wrote a book about it, a short book. It's available in Chinese, and the material is all there. Wow. And he describes how the Red Guards told him, "You're going to be shot." He's a young teenager. He hasn't done anything. And they said, "You will be shot 100 times. And he says, "Well, I thought to myself, if I can just be shot once, what does it matter if they shoot me 100 times? And this is one tough guy. He got through that. He's then exiled to the countryside, which he views with relief, aged 15, because he's getting away from the madness. And he finds himself in this remote village in the middle of Shanxi province where his father originally came from. It's incredibly primitive. Even when we were traveling in China and working in this new century, one encountered conditions of extreme hardship and poverty and a very simple basic way of life still. So back then, this is the late 1960s, early 1970s, it was very tough. He did live in a cave. They shared a barrel, a communal barrel for defecation and making night soil. The food was basic. The peasants had a certain number of kilograms of grains for the year, and they talked about the seasons in terms of hunger. This is the way he lived. It was hard manual labor. Eventually, he tries 8 times to join the Communist Youth League. He tries 10 times to join the Communist Party. Eventually, the wheel of politics changes. He comes back to Beijing. His father is restored to office after Chairman Mao's death, and life begins again. But here's a guy who, by the age of 21, has been through shattering experiences. I can't think of a single Western politician who has any backstory to compare with that. So do not underestimate this man. He had little formal education because his education was torn apart. He went to university on a special program for workers and students and soldiers. It was a affirmative action, DEI initiative at the end of the 1970s. So he didn't have a great theoretical grounding, but he is an extraordinary hard worker. He's diligent. He's very serious. He's always been very serious. And he just gritted his teeth and he got on with it. This is one extraordinary guy. Now, he also had privilege because at the end of his university career, his mother and his father pulled strings and got him an incredible starter job. He kicked off in the defense ministry as one of only 3 private secretaries to the man who was then in charge of the Chinese defense establishment. So he goes from living in a remote village, tilling the fields and defecating in a barrel, to 3 years of pretty intense university, and then straight into an office at the defense ministry where he is with the top people and listening to the most secret matters of state and hearing talk about the Soviet Union, Russia, United States. The man he worked for opened up the Chinese military to dialogue with America. He went to Washington, he met President Carter, and this was the guy who was Xi Jinping's mentor. So from an early age, he has been right in there. And he was unknown really to the outside world when he came to power in 2012. Frankly, we journalists underestimated him. We sat there in Beijing and he emerged as this figure, vice president and then leader of the party. I'm pretty sure we all thought, oh, it's another guy in a suit, a middle-aged Chinese man in a suit, along with lots of other middle-aged Chinese men in suits. This is boring. It was perhaps intended to be boring. He gave no clue of the very, very strong personality and the methods he would unleash. So it's a story that tells itself. Now, when you set out to write a biography of a living person, by definition, it is incomplete. So the first dissuasion really was, why would you write a book about somebody whose life is not yet complete? And the answer is, A, there is no other life of him on the market. It's not there. B, the story continues. C, the story has become more dramatic and more important in the last 24 months. And the election of President Trump and the realignment of world forces bears witness to the fact that Xi Jinping himself has said there are things going on that are unseen for a century. And these are huge events and we are driving them. So my view was, how can you not write it?
What does your book tell us about what Xi Jinping thinks of the world today and China today, and how is his experiences, which are fascinating, how has it shaped his view to what China is today, and what does the book tell us about that?
There's a chapter in the book called What He Thinks, and it tells the reader all about the influences on Xi Jinping's life through what they claim officially and through what we know. So there are 3 key themes. One is his childhood and youth experience, which we've talked about: incredible hardship, fear, deprivation, falling from power, seeing the destruction of privilege, and fighting back. The second is the theoretical. He claims that when he went to the countryside, he went with a suitcase of books containing such things as the works of Marx and Engels, which I frankly doubt that a 16-year-old in rural China was very interested in. They claim that he studied all manner of Leninist Marxist texts. He has read the novels of Hemingway. He has talked about French 19th century literature, Les Miserables. He says that he has read Shakespeare. He studied at university chemical engineering, so he became familiar with the sciences. He's never said to be an intellectual. He doesn't claim to be an intellectual. In fact, some of the Chinese elite were rather snobbish about him and said, well, he's a bit common and didn't get a top-class degree and, not very bright. And I remember saying to these people in Hong Kong, they were elite bankers, well, he's not doing badly so far. So don't underestimate the guy.
Yeah.
What does he think? That's the second thing. Theoretical grounding. It's genuine. He believes in Marx. He believes in Lenin. He thinks Stalin is undervalued. He has talked about Stalin's essays on the Chinese Revolution, which were published in between 1921 and 1927. There's a volume, which I found in a bookstore in Beijing, translated into various languages. And you have to remember, to his generation of Chinese communists, Soviet Russia was the great originator. His father, Chairman Mao, and others, they looked to Stalin and Moscow as the model. So when the Communist Party of the Soviet Union fell apart at the end of the 20th century, this was a great warning to them. So take the youthful experience, add in this strong theoretical grounding and belief in socialism and Marxism, which I believe is absolutely genuine and should be taken seriously. In fact, we should all study Marxism more closely because these guys believe in it. And the third thing is his interaction with foreigners. He goes to the United States officially the first time in 1985 as a young man. He goes to the Midwest. It's the middle of the Reagan Revolution. The United States is booming, and the agricultural heartland of the Midwest is where American prosperity and the contrast with China is very evident. He stays with an American family. He sees the extraordinary level of cultural, commercial, social comfort that Americans enjoy. And of course, in his own memory, is rural life in China and what it's like there. The contrast is extraordinary. So he sees the material advantage of the United States and Western society. He then begins to meet more foreigners. There's a very influential period in his life where he's essentially working in different posts on the eastern seaboard of China, in Fujian, in Xiamen, and other places of Fuzhou. He does a lot of interaction with Taiwan. As far as we know, he's never been to Taiwan. You can't be absolutely sure with any of this stuff because it's all secret. Mm-hmm. As far as I know, he's never been to Taiwan, but he has met thousands of Taiwanese people. He's engaged with Taiwanese business. He fostered investment and reciprocal trade when he was in Fujian. He knows how important Taiwan is economically to China. He's been to Hong Kong. He went to Hong Kong several times while he was vice president and in his official capacities. I talked to one of the leaders of Hong Kong, Donald Tsang, who was chief executive for a while, and he told me about riding around Hong Kong in a limousine with Xi Jinping, chatting very casually, very warm, very well informed. He knew who the top families were. He knew how Hong Kong worked. He understood its importance to China. He talked about investment. Very easygoing, familiar, well-informed, very intelligent. That's what Donald Tsang said. And so he began to be exposed to experiences and things outside his previous life. Mm. And of course, he blossomed in interactions with foreign leaders. We know, and I have a chapter devoted to this, he met Joe Biden, I think, 8 times minimum, while they were both vice presidents and on the way up. And the two men had long talks. President Obama sent Biden to China specifically to engage with Xi Jinping and to talk to him, to interact with him, to try and build bridges. It wasn't very successful because Xi Jinping is a well-trained, highly disciplined Communist Party member. They don't do spontaneity. They don't do backslapping good guy stuff. Even in long one-on-one or with small group meetings, Chinese leaders do not deviate from the script. Joe Biden went back to Washington convinced that the United States was facing a much more formidable opponent than any of the previous Chinese leaders they had engaged with. And one thing which Xi Jinping said to him stuck in Biden's mind is that Xi Jinping took the lesson from Chinese history, in particular the last 100 years, that China must never make concessions. It must not give in on points of principle. It must never surrender any of its demands. So the demands are set in concrete as far as he is concerned, and they are not negotiable. The other problem in negotiating with him and with the Chinese state is that during the Cold War, the Americans were able to engage with the Soviet Union across a spectrum of issues: trade, security, nuclear proliferation, human rights, democracy, etc. And although there was conflict with the Kremlin, there was a doctrine of severance. They were able to sever one issue from another. So they could talk to the Russians in Helsinki about human rights, but they could also talk to them in Geneva about nuclear arms. That's how the arms control treaties were negotiated. With the Chinese, negotiation is much trickier because they see things as a unity. You have been bad to us about Taiwan, so we're not going to talk to you about electric cars. You have insulted the Chinese people by receiving the Dalai Lama, so we're not going to discuss that railway contract. It's a unity to them. And the success points in foreign Western diplomacy with them have been when you've managed to insert a wedge and to force them to discuss something or negotiate on it separate from their other concerns. Margaret Thatcher achieved that with Hong Kong and Deng Xiaoping. When China is faced with overwhelming compulsion and force, the necessity to talk about things and negotiate with counterparts, it will do so. But it requires persistence and skill. Chinese communists are trained to win. They are doctrinaire revolutionaries, and they are taught at the Central Party School and coming up through the system that governing China is not a matter of building roads or digging canals or simply ensuring social stability. Communists are trained to win and to advance the revolution. They believe that Marxism takes history forward in a linear way and that there is a progression to the aims of communism. They don't see this as day-to-day management. So you always have to remember that these are very skillfully trained political operatives. A cadre is a Communist Party member trained and schooled to govern and to engage with opponents and to dominate the debate. So he is the incarnation of that. And he's a very, very tough cookie to crack.
Is he anti-West? Because the perception of Xi, certainly from some sections of the media, or certainly how it's perceived, is that he's the dictator. The West needs an enemy. Everything that China does, it seems to be sort of annoying to the West. Is he anti-West personally? Do you think, or is he productive in saying, well, we have to work with the West? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Everything we know about Xi Jinping's writing, his learning, his experience tells us that he is hostile to Western values, Western democracy, the Western philosophical tradition. Even the legacy of ancient Greece and Rome is used in China by academics to teach us that democracy doesn't really work. The fall of the Roman Republic, the end of ancient Greece, they will selectively take things from the Western experience and bend them to their own uses. Xi Jinping sees China as a country recovering from centuries of humiliation at the hands of foreigners. When he came to power, one of the first things they did was to make a new museum on the corner of Tiananmen Square about national rejuvenation. And if you go to this museum, which I have done several times, you see a long catalogue of foreign crimes against the Chinese people, exploitation, violence, division, an attempt to undermine China as a nation state. A lot of this is true. It was invaded by Japan. The Japanese militarists wanted to divide China. They openly believed that it was too big to be one country. The suffering inflicted on the Chinese people was enormous. Nobody denies that. But there are a few things they don't mention or they distort. And the worrying thing is that this is the prism through which Xi Jinping sees things. The Opium Wars, for example, are regarded as foreign, evil exploitation of China. No mention is made of the fact that the opium was distributed throughout inland China by Chinese gangs and by corrupt officials. The biggest loss of land to a foreign power by Imperial China was to Russia. The British took Hong Kong, but they gave it back in 1997. The Portuguese took Macau, but they gave it back in 1999. The Germans and the Japanese and others all lost their concessions after the First and Second World Wars. Who took the most land from China? It was Russia. And when Xi Jinping was a young official in the Defense Ministry, they had maps on the wall showing the lost territories. So in the 19th century, when the Qing dynasty was very weak, it conceded the loss of a huge swathe of land in the north and the east to the Tsars. And those lands, which you can imagine on the map, far northwest and Pacific, those are Vladimir Putin's eastern oblasts today. They were given over by treaty. I think it's the Treaty of Agun 1858, off the top of my head. A noted Tsarist diplomat scored a great triumph in these negotiations. The emperor conceded, and China lost these great swathes of land, and Russia is certainly not going to give them back. Also remember, in 1947 to 1949, Soviet troops were in Xinjiang. They were occupying a swathe of Western China, and Stalin only withdrew as a concession or a deal with Chairman Mao. So, yes, Xi Jinping is anti-Western. He is hostile to every idea from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. He detests popular democracy. He sees it as chaos. He believes it is unsuitable for China and Chinese people and culture, which is a ridiculous overgeneralization and a trope which, if a Westerner repeated, would be rightly condemned as a stereotype. But his worldview is a very Sino-centric one. He talks about socialism with Chinese characteristics. They talk about the Sinification of religion. So religion is allowed. Buddhism and Catholicism and evangelical Christianity and so on are allowed, so long as they are Sinicized and coordinated with the government. It's actually a very clear worldview. It's coherent. It's well argued. He has a lot of history on his side, and it's very tough for liberal Chinese people and dissenters and critics and would-be Democrats to combat it. So this is a mighty force. He has come to power and taken power over the last decade or more in a way that no other Chinese leader has done since the middle of the 20th century.
Trump's back in the White House. Will that embolden China? And what does that mean for Taiwan?
No question the Chinese will have a very sophisticated, graduated game plan for dealing with Trump over a range of issues from tariffs to security. I believe he's very sophisticated when it comes to China. The Americans got very good advice. they devote an incredible amount of intellectual firepower and analytical energy to finding out what China is doing and what it's likely to do next. They don't know everything. You can't know the mind of a dictator. The Chinese are watching Taiwan very carefully. I was in Taiwan for the election a year ago. The outcome left politics there gridlocked. Mm-hmm. There's little chance of a dramatic move towards independence or anything that would make China immediately react. Make no mistake, Taiwan is a red line. The Chinese, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, has repeated recently, they have set their red lines. We need to watch those red lines because they mean it. These are not negotiable for the regime. You can do things around them, but Taiwan is one of those red lines. The Americans, I believe, have done a very, very good job in maintaining constructive ambiguity and in keeping the balance of security and peace. The Chinese military has the capacity to turn up the volume and turn it down again. Air patrols, sea patrols, interdictions, all the panoply of measures we've seen them take. It's very clear that Xi Jinping wants to reunify the country. He sees the eventual unification as the end of the Chinese Civil War, the completion of the task as a nationalist which he's been given. I'd be careful about overestimating this. For example, he's told the People's Liberation Army to be ready, to be in readiness to act on Taiwan by 2027. All militaries practice to be in readiness. It does not mean that he is going to order an invasion of Taiwan in 2027. So the Americans quite rightly have paid attention to that, they've reacted to it, but you need to keep these things in balance. The military balance is still overwhelmingly in favor of the United States and its allies. I believe a military adventure would be a disaster for China. The Americans privately have told the Chinese not to make a fatal mistake. There was a very dangerous period late in the Biden administration where they feared that some people in Beijing, having watched Putin invade Ukraine and get away with it, were very likely to say, this is the moment to go for Taiwan. And Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, others, they went to China and they got over the message, don't make this mistake. I think that message got through. So we're in a very delicate period. People need to keep their nerve. The allies may not like everything President Trump does, but it's extremely important that a united front is presented to Beijing. Their aim very clearly is to divide the US from its allies, to make people in Japan and South Korea and Southeast Asia doubt the value of the American commitment. But we all gain. The world has gained from the stability and peace in East Asia and in the Pacific for more than half a century. China exports to the world thanks to the security of the sea lanes and commerce by sea and the ability to trade freely across borders, free from interference and piracy and damage. So China's been a winner from this order. It would be very, very foolish to disrupt it. But I think the chances of a war are perhaps reduced by having an unpredictable, strong opponent in the White House, whatever one thinks of President Trump. And I leave with one thought from an American official in the last Trump administration who had access to all the government's intelligence on Xi Jinping and assessments of his personality. And he said to me, look, Xi Jinping is a gambler who will take risks, but he is not reckless. And that's something to keep in mind. So if you make it clear that the balance of power is against war and against risk-taking, he won't make that move.
What are the things that people in the West should look upon China in a positive way? And where is China vulnerable?
Overall, I'm an optimist about China. The country's achieved incredible things in the last 40 and 50 years. Its culture and its civilization are admirable. I was always astonished and impressed having the privilege to go around China, work there, covering big official events, but also going to news stories and seeing the bad side and so on. And nobody can fail to be impressed by the intelligence and diligence and industriousness and sociability of the Chinese people. What culture reveres education more? It's highly admirable. And they have done things in the last half century, after all that war and destruction, that very few other countries could achieve. And the Chinese people have done that themselves by their own hard work. The Communist Party didn't do that. And just because there's a dictatorship right now doesn't mean that opinion and ideas are dead. Far from it. The optimistic scenario is that the big powers keep the peace. China continues to grow. Its people are better educated, more widely traveled, more exposed to global ideas than at any time in Chinese history. That will continue. The young people are terrific. Tech is going so fast that they're developing creativity in ways that were unknown, 20 years ago. Xi Jinping will not be there forever. One day he will go. I believe that when he does go, there will be a new collective leadership under the Communist Party. But as in other Asian countries, that will begin to open the path to political reform. Maybe in a Chinese way, maybe in a limited democratic way at first. We have seen in one Asian country after another a progression from military dictatorships through phases of liberalization and into mature, imperfect, noisy, but functioning democratic societies and economies. And I think China can go the same way.
When we talk about where it's vulnerable, we can go on to Hong Kong. Myself, I reported in Hong Kong during a pivotal time in 2019. I was there prior and there afterwards. You've written a book about Hong Kong, which is the gate to China. Let's talk about Hong Kong. And, was Hong Kong this, it was handed back to the Chinese from the British in 97. Was Hong Kong, let's say, the trapdoor, the vulnerability to China and to China's rule in mainland China under Xi Jinping? And what did you make of the democratic crackdown in Hong Kong as well? How significant was it throughout? Was this always Xi Jinping's plan, China's plan? Did it become earlier than it was supposed to because of the Sino agreement?
Like everybody who's lived and worked in Hong Kong, I have strong feelings for the place. Mm-hmm. And it was an incredible city from the 1940s until 1997 under British colonial rule. A unique character, global, international, Chinese, but weirdly British, and with these strong international communities. Let's not forget all the other ethnic minorities who live in Hong Kong made it a success. The handover of Hong Kong was a test of China and of the world. There was a treaty negotiated ultimately by Margaret Thatcher and Deng Xiaoping. It was signed in 1982. Britain handed back the territory in good faith in 1997. And for a long time, things in Hong Kong went quite well. The city flourished economically, had its ups and downs, limited democracy locally, reasonable government, good civil service, and then things began to go wrong. And if you ask Chris Patten, the last British governor, he says, look, it all started with Xi Jinping. It's not entirely true, because there were undercurrents in Hong Kong, class struggle, disadvantaged people, a very sharp economic pyramid with an elite at the top. It boiled over, as you know, into two rounds, in fact, several rounds of protests from the early parts of this century, usually triggered by legislation. Then there was the mass movement to occupy Central, which was very peaceful, went on for more than 70 days. Not a single life was lost.
2014, yeah.
And this was the people of Hong Kong coming onto the streets to say, we want democracy, we want freedom, we want a better future. Eventually, the government crushed that, and there was a period of calm. And then in 2019 came this explosion of discontent. And let's not forget, to be balanced, it was violent. There was rioting. Places were burnt. People were beaten up. There were pitched battles between protesters and the police. It was a different kind of protest movement. I was there on both occasions. I watched the fighting, no other word for it, in Kowloon and in Hong Kong Island. It was really hard to understand what was going on because the 2019 movement was very much of its times. It was leaderless. It was spontaneous. It was flash mobs. It was WhatsApp groups. It was Telegram. Be like water. I didn't understand, and I still don't really understand, how that movement grew and what it thought it was going to achieve. But it ended in disaster. Let's be real about this. First of all, the government clamped down. A disciplined police force is always going to win against unorganised protesters. It just is. I saw that on the streets of London in the 1970s, and I saw it in Hong Kong in 2019. And then came COVID-19.
Yeah.
So the government had an excuse to shut down public order and to regulate society and to keep tight control, just as it did in China. That was the end of the protest movement. Then, of course, the national security law imposed by Beijing, the perversion of the judiciary, show trials, arrests, exiles, harassment and persecution in a petty, vindictive way of people who dared to do nothing more than speak for their local rights and local government. And it's a very sad picture. But the message I think we all need to get is Hong Kong is a Chinese city. Get used to it. It is part of China. And its autonomy and its separate way of life have been taken away. That means that under Xi Jinping, China has broken the treaty, which it signed and registered at the United Nations. Therefore, its word is worthless. And in a way, that's vulnerable. That's making China vulnerable. It gave its word about Hong Kong and it broke it. So what weight would you put on its promises if you were in Taiwan or any other neighboring Asian country? So throughout its history, Hong Kong has been the gate into China for ideas and commerce and so on. It's also been China's way out to the world, remember. Chairman Mao could have conquered Hong Kong, but he and Zhou Enlai chose to keep it open. It was a two-way street. And then ultimately the party decided after 1989 and under Xi Jinping that it was dangerous, that it was a conduit for ideas and dissent and trouble. And its risk to China outweighed its benefits. So the reality is that China has taken control. It is imposing a very harsh law on Hong Kong. It has suppressed ordinary political life. There is no prospect of improvement under Xi Jinping. Anybody operating in Hong Kong as a business needs to understand that they are in a new environment. And only the most realistic assessment of your business risks and your personal risks should be undertaken, because anyone in Hong Kong is living under the rule of Xi Jinping. And just because it has a large international community will not make it immune to trouble if trouble comes.
Because it is, despite it's changed a lot recently, but it still is different to mainland China in terms it has its own currency and obviously its own borders and things like that, its own legislative council, its own parliament, but it's still controlled at the central government of China.
The Chinese government would say that Hong Kong continues to enjoy what was called a high degree of autonomy.
Yes.
But that degree has got smaller and smaller. So yes, there are border controls, separate currency, very much in China's interests, so the Hong Kong dollar and the Hong Kong financial centre economy. But remember, they talk about the Greater Bay Area. That's right, yeah. Talk about bringing Hong Kong into a web of cities and commercial areas extending across the Greater Bay Area, southern Guangdong province. I believe they see Hong Kong as one of a number of proliferating, wealthy, money-generating cities around the Delta. Mm-hmm. It will have international characteristics and a substantial foreign financial community, but that is it.
Mr. Michael Sheridan, thank you so much for being on. It's been a privilege. It's been super interesting. I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I know we have to go. But thank you so much. Before we leave, let us know your 2 books, Gate in China and your book about Xi. Do you want to tell the listeners, the audience, about where they can buy this or buy both of them?
Well, both my books on the region are available on Amazon, of course, and they're also in the bookstores in Bangkok, Hong Kong, Singapore, elsewhere. The Gate to China is semi-academic history of Hong Kong, but I hope very readable. That's selling quite well. And the Red Emperor, which is the biography of Xi Jinping, very simple, clear, direct read, selling very well here in the bookstores in Bangkok, I saw, on the airport stands, and available to anybody who would like an easy read.
Yeah, may I add, when you were speaking at the club the other night, the Red Emperor sold out. They were sold out of copies, so it's a very popular book for anyone who's listening and watching. So if you're interested in China and Xi Jinping, I think it's a must buy, a must read. So yeah, it's great that it's online and available. And again, thanks so much for coming on. I think it's been brilliant, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
It's a pleasure, Tommy. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's it for today. This has been part 2 of the Dateline Bangkok podcast with Michael Sheridan. Just to remind you that Dateline Bangkok is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So please like, follow, share, and subscribe. And feel free to check the FCCT's website and social media for upcoming events here at the club. And stay tuned for more interesting guests on this podcast in the coming weeks.